speaker, Dr. Hsain Ilahiane, got his PhD here at the University of Arizona. He's an applied cultural anthropologist and professor at the School of Middle Eastern and North African Studies and the W.A. Franke Honors College. Prior to joining the University of Arizona, he served as professor and head of the Department of Anthropology and Middle Eastern Cultures at Mississippi State University, and prior to that, he taught at the University of Kentucky and Iowa State University, and spent a year as senior social scientist at Intel Corporation Research Labs in Oregon. His research interests are economic development, arid lands ecology, oasis agriculture and irrigation systems, technology and social change, urban information economies, economic anthropology, and political ecology. He has conducted ethnographic research in Morocco, the US, Uganda, Kenya, and South Africa. He is the author of Ethnicities, Community Making and Agrarian Change, The Political Ecology of a Moroccan Oasis from 2004, The Historical Dictionary of the Berbers from 2017, and most recently, The Mobile Phone Revolution in Morocco, Cultural and Economic Transformations, 2022. Recently returned from the High Jolly Festival in Quartzsite, Arizona. Today he will speak on Estevan de Dorantes, aka Estevanico or Estevan, the first Moroccan and African explorer of the American Southwest. Hsain, welcome home.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I also want to thank Dr. Jennifer Jenkins for introducing me to the Southwest Center. Where is she? Yes. Yeah, thank you so much. And also I want to thank Carlos Quintero for organizing, for doing all this legwork to bring us together. So again, thanks for, I am also delighted to be here. And thank you for the warm welcome, Jennifer. It's exciting to be here. All right, well, what we will do today is I would just want to start a little bit about a tiny bit of history of why I was interested in Estevanico. So, and particularly for those of you who are students, okay? So when I was a graduate student here at the end of the 20th century, okay, so a friend talked to me about. The friend learned that I was from Morocco. The friend said, do you know that Tucson has a park named after this person? His name is Esteban, and I think he's Moroccan. I'm not sure, okay? So the nerd in me, because that's what you do in graduate school, okay? So I went and started digging a little bit, okay, about who this person was. You know, why would a Moroccan be here in the 16th century? After all, he's not Ibn Battuta, the famous, the famous Moroccan explorer from Tangier, right? Okay? So that really opened that gate of curiosity, wonder. So it fueled my wonder, so to speak, right? And I started digging into this. And things just, I went into a rabbit hole, and I think things have worked pretty much well with Estevanico. So he's not known in Morocco. So I grew up in Morocco. He was not now. Over the last 20 years, there is a body of literature and also of interest, whether it's historical, but mostly from the literature and fiction side of things. So there is a lot to do, okay? So that's just a little bit of background. So for students and everybody, actually, curiosity pays off, okay? So what I will do today, as you see on the slide, is I will talk to you a little bit. I will talk about or examine the status and place of Esteban de Dorantes in the 16th century Spanish accounts, known as relaciones, okay? So in spite of lingering memory of Estevanico among the Native American Indians and his being the first non-Indian to venture into the Zuni pueblos of Cibola or Granada to Coronado, all historical accounts are silent about him, except that he was a slave and he accompanied Fray Marcos de Niza into the American Southwest. So Zuni archaeologist Ed Ladd, for instance, tells us that there are no accounts that I could locate to describe Estevan, his size or his stature. He's a man either ignored or avoided by history, who is a very important southwestern personality. He was one of the first to see the Mississippi River, the first to contact the Pueblo people, and the first to die at the hands of the native people. His place in history is as important as Viceroy Mendoza, Coronado, or Antonio de Espejo. What's also interesting for me when I start digging into Estevanico is the fact that he's relegated to a footnote in the history of the Americas or also of the American Southwest, okay? But there is also another fact, which is that he remains an important figure in the cultural repertoire of the Pueblo Indians, for instance, right? So that's Zuni there, okay, Zuni land right there, and the presence or the symbolic or the symbolic representation is in what the Native American groups of Zuni, Hopi, and others call the Chacuena, okay? So it's so much so that he's part and parcel of their cultural heritage, so to speak, okay? All right, okay? So given his place or minimized place in the Spanish historical accounts, right? Also this idea of his betweenness, the in-betweenness of his social status, and also the mixture of medieval historical accounts with Indian reality, I dug into who was Estevanico, the Moor, who is this creature, okay? So I will talk a little bit about who Estevanico was. Then I will delve to bore you to tears, into the journey of Estevanico with Fray Marcos de Niza. So get ready, embrace yourself, okay? And I will take you all to the 16th century Morocco, the most beautiful country in the world, okay? Yeah, I'm going to gain points with the Moroccan government. Okay? And after that, we do all these things, and I want also to give it a little bit of a theoretical twist. Most of you have heard all these things, but I have my own interpretation because I happen to be I am a cultural anthropologist and other things, so I want to give it a twist. And hopefully we will end up with the so what. Why are you telling us all this? So why am I spending Thursday afternoon with you, okay? So we will look maybe into some applications, and particularly for students and so on. Okay, so who was Estevanico? Okay. And so as I said, history is silent about Estevanico. He was part of this epic in the 1500s to the Americas, then to what's today to Zuni lands and what have you, right? So starting from the Spanish account is that they tell us that Esteban was a slave, that he was a Moor from the town of Azmur on the Atlantic coast of Morocco, and that he was killed by the Zunis between 1539 and 1540, okay? So they also refer to him, as a Moor, North African Arab, the N-word, or the black, as a Moreno, or brown man, or simply Estevanico, okay? in the diminutive form, signifying not only his forced conversion to Catholicism, but also identifying him with Saint Stephen, okay? The proto-martyr or first martyr of Christianity, who was stoned to death in 35 AD, okay? Adorno and Podes, other people who have done an amazing research on Cabeza de Vaca and others, write, and they quote, "The use of the diminutive form Estevanico was common practice for subalterns, such as slaves and interpreters, African or Indian, in the service of Castilians," end of quote. So, and I think linked to this is the notion of the Moor. You know, what is the Moor? What's that status? What does it mean to be a Moor? So again, the literature is vague in terms of when it applies or it appropriates the term Moor. So just take it as, from me, that it's widely discussed, and it's vague unless it's pinned down to particular historical moments. Then we can. But overall, we can say that since the Inquisition, Moor has come to mean a Muslim adversary. So, and all that we learn also from the etymology is that the Moor refers to a Muslim who lived in Andalusia or what have you, and that they were expelled, right? And here I want to move. So a little bit of where Azmur is. Okay, right here, the Casablanca. Azmur is here. That's where Estevanico's town is, where he's from. And this is a mural actually in his town after an art festival. So they are celebrating. Estevanico is getting a lot of attention. Okay. So we can talk about the idea of the Moor, of the etymology more if you're interested, but it's a major concern. As anthropologists, words matter. The genealogy of words, the archaeology of words is very important, where they come from, who says what, and why. So considering the sources of the written sources or the historical Spanish sources, in addition to the population dynamics of 16th century Morocco, it is by far most likely that Esteban was an Arabic-speaking black Muslim before his departure from Morocco. This is just a little bit about Estevanico and the term Moor. Now I want to delve into the journey, okay, of Estevanico coming from Mexico, if you want to call it that today, to today's Arizona and so on. Okay, so his itinerary, okay? So again, a map, and this is a picture again from Zuni that I found on the internet, okay? And so on. I was there a long time ago in the late 90s. So we'll start again with a quote, okay, from Hammond, another person who's quoted much. So Hammond writes that one day in the summer of 1536, more than 400 years ago, four strange figures appeared in Mexico City. These four ragged men dressed in skins and tattered strips of cloth were Cabeza de Vaca and his three companions. Dorantes, Castillo, Maldonado, and the N-word, Estevan, called a Moor by the famous archaeologist, for some of you, Bandelier, right? So these four men were the sole survivors. Were the sole survivors of the Narváez Expedition that sailed from Spain in 1527 with the objective of conquering Florida. They were stranded on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico at Texas and captured by Indian tribes. After 8 years of slavery by the Indians, they escaped and found their way from one tribe to another across western Texas through the southern borderlands, arriving in the Spanish town of Culiacán in the spring of 1536. Bolton, another much quoted person, writes, Baca and his companions were sometimes abject slaves, carrying heavy loads for cruel masters, but later were revered as children of the sun. And what you see there is a painting of the four, and this is actually an English translation of the Relation or the report of Cabeza de Vaca that was written in 1542, okay? There is another report, the joint report that was actually dictated to others, but this is one of the one that I use and so on. Okay, cruel master, blah, blah, blah. Okay, in reference to Esteban. Okay, another person also, Webb, writes that his 8 years with the Indians had initiated him into the craft of exploration and sign language. He had behind him a desert experience or heritage in Africa, which fitted him for his work. After Cabeza de Vaca used him as an advance agent and left all the talking to be done by him, the white man found that their best role was one of silence, such as befitted medicine men and gods. The Estevanico had, in fact, learned to play medicine man himself and had in his possession the gur, the rattle, and other things which he retained as relics of his transcontinental role. So upon arrival in Mexico City, the four men told the Viceroy Mendoza their voyage from Spain through Florida and Texas to New Spain. Their story described abundant resources in the northern territories and provided an ethnographic account like no other had reached the ears of the anxious conquistadores who were in search of lands to be claimed and drained. They reported on the life of the sedentary Pueblo peoples, cultural adaptation of hunter-gatherers, cotton blankets, permanent houses, systems of cultivation, and trade relations among the Indian tribes. They also claimed that they heard of rivers of gold, silver hills, and at least one mountain full of all kinds of metals and precious stone upon which a person could not look in the sunlight for fear of going blind. These pieces of information woven together made the victory, the viceroy dream of the day when these riches could come under royal authority. So to outdo other conquistadores who might covet the northern El Dorado, Mendoza, the viceroy of New Spain, suggested a covert expedition that Cabeza de Vaca would lead. One of the four non-Indian survivors who had first-hand travel experience, only Esteban went back. Cabeza de Vaca had other intention and declined the offer. Dorantes settled down to a married life and the royal service, and Castillo became an encomendero in Tehuacan. In 1538, Mendoza recruited the services of Fray Marcos de Niza, a missionary with experience in the work of God in the Americas, to lead the northern venture. To keep costs low, no soldiers or officials were sent, no one was paid, and supplies and equipment were minimal. Because Mendoza was not sure about the financial rewards of the venture, he then named Coronado, the governor of Nueva Galicia, to supervise the organization of the expedition and to assist Francisco de Niza and Esteban in their journey to the north in search of the legendary 7 cities of Cibola. Coronado communicated the viceroy's instructions to Fray Marcos concerning the goals and the code of conduct for the expedition. The instructions recommended that information on the territories ranging from aspects of geography and people to resources be collected and mapped. They also directed the expedition to refrain from mistreating Indians and to intensify the religious conversion of the natives. Above all, the instructions ordered Esteban to obey Fray Marcos, noting that if he failed to do so, he would incur the punishment of the King of Spain. The series of instructions imposed specifically on Esteban were unusual. One wonders why Mendoza felt obliged to state this code of conduct and punishment for its violation if Esteban was a slave as is claimed. Slaves did not have the space to resist, and it did not take the mobilization of the king's services to make them compliant and obedient. So, on March 7, 1539, the covert venture or caravan, in my language, okay, was on its way north. So it appears from reading Marcos' account that Esteban realized that he was the de facto leader of the mission and had no intention of taking orders from the priest. Once they were in the desert wilderness, very far from the centers of Spanish power, the Fray Marcos depended on him. Estevanico was familiar with the route, the Indians knew him, and he was no longer a marginal person in the desert, an environment with which he was very familiar. He had a bundle of supplies, slaves, and a personal servant, and 2 greyhounds. He adorned himself with pieces of turquoise, a medicinal gourd, feathers, and jingling colorful bells on his ankles. He also acquired Indian women and 4 large green plates and had his food served to him. This behavior, which would be normal or even laudatory, a hard English word to say after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in medieval Islamic society disturbed the priest. So they had a conflict. So different ways or different worldviews here, I think, come to clash in the desert. Nevertheless, Esteban continued to practice native religious rituals and made the sign of the cross over the sick. He discarded the priest's demand that he reject the women and gifts offered to him by the Indians. Although Esteban was performing his guide duties very well, the friar seems to have been concerned about his dancing and drinking with the natives. The clash between the 2 men did not concern official duty. Esteban performed his duties as instructed. The clash was cultural, moral, or religious. To avoid conflict that might endanger the fate of the search for the 7 cities and the work of the church, Fray Marcos decided to send Esteban ahead. He ordered him to advance, but no more than 50 or 60 leagues, okay? So 4 days later, to the astonishment of Friar Marcos, Indian runners arrived with cross the size of a man, later on with even bigger with bigger crosses and so on. So just for the sake of time here, okay. So as the friar tried to catch up with the disobedient Esteban, the only news he could get was that his guide had departed a long time. So the literature based on Castañeda's account, this is the chronicle of Coronado's expedition, okay, comments that Esteban kept ahead of the friar for the sole reason that he should discover Cibola, he would gain honor and prestige. This may well have been the case, but Esteban remained somewhat loyal to the friar and arranged his passage through the Indian villages and territory. By this time, Esteban was making his way through a country that had never been traversed by an outsider, a land known only to Indians. 50 days passed before the friar received news that Esteban had been killed in the Zuni pueblo of Hawiku. There is also a debate there about whether it's Kiakima or Hawiku. There is a debate there, okay? Despite his wish for peace and the fact that he was reputed to be a great medicine man with a great curing power, the Zuni people refused Esteban entrance into their city. When he did not go away, the Zunis arrested Esteban and stripped him of all of his ornaments and supplies. When he tried to escape, the Zunis pursued and killed him. For Friar Marcos de Niza may or may not have reached Zuni himself, but his account would spur the Coronado expedition in 1540, which marked the beginning of Spanish colonization of the present southwestern area of the United States. Given Fray Marcos' contested account, based on Sauer, if some of you are familiar with him, geographer, it is not surprising that the way in which Esteban met his death among the Zunis remains a matter of contention. Some accounts, similar to the one that Fray Marcos himself produced, claim that the conflict between the Cibolan chiefs and Esteban concerned the Moors' magical powers and violations of Zuni social and religious codes, while others suggest that it was his pride, arrogance, and request for women and turquoise which offended the Cibolans and led them to kill him. Again, Pedro de Castañeda, as I mentioned earlier on, who reached Zuni land in 1540 with Coronado soldier, underscores Esteban's command of various Indian languages and healing prowess and knowledge, but also attributes his death to arrogance and violation of Zuni social codes. So there is a lot, in terms of in terms of the debate, how he died, how he met his last days among Zuni, and so on. So it ranges from the idea that he was, as I mentioned earlier on, that he was after the riches. He will be the first one to claim, so he can get a land grant from the King of Spain, to other religious or ritual violations of the calendar. Okay, so women, very interesting. So Bolton, also another person here, talks about how he met his about how the Zunis killed Esteban because there were his brothers or other people are coming to invade. So they didn't want him to tell them the location. He was, so to speak, a spy, and so on, right? I'm trying to move very quickly. Okay, so there is another account here again by Hammond and so on, is similar. So they decided to kill him again, the location and other things, right? Okay. So other interesting or close to anthropology or a cultural symbolic analysis by Ahern, for instance, says that the Lord of Cibola could well have identified the Gurs of surrounding hostile group. What this means is that Estevanico was a danger for the Zunis because of the ritual artifacts that he was carrying. It signaled that he was associated with other enemy tribes. Another one, very quickly here, is that the Zunis killed Estevanico undoubtedly because they thought of him as a witch. Okay. And that comes to us from Parsons in her Pueblo Indian religion, a classic, so to speak. So what we have here is that is an interesting set of interpretations. We don't have really any archaeological evidence, so to speak, right? But how that said, in modern times, while we lack archaeological verification of these stories or these interpretations, Zuni oral tradition reports that Esteban had not been killed as described in the Spanish account, because the Zunis held Esteban in high esteem, and to make sure that he could not escape, cut his feet, quote, placed him flat on his back, and worshipped him as a god. Esteban lived among the Zunis for many years, finally dying an old deity without feet, end of quote. So here it appears that we have this mixture, in terms of his demise, where we don't know where things lay. So it's my argument against yours, and so on. Okay, so that's a little bit of the Speedy Gonzalez, from Mexico all the way to Zuni land, with some takes on his demise and the conflict with the friar. I want to move a little bit to talk to you about where Esteban came from. Okay, what led him? Because the thread here, or something that I'm trying to contest, is the idea of slave, of being a slave. That's where I'm going to go all around the world. Where is my ear? It's right here to tell you that, right? So bear with me a little bit, because again, this needs a little bit of historical context. The 16th century was one of the most painful centuries in North Africa, okay, in the history of North Africa. It was also a momentous century for others, okay, in terms of their rise to power and the geographical expeditions, and so on, okay? So here we go, then I will not read. After the fall of the last Tawa'if Caliphate, or Muslim kings in Granada, in Cordoba and Sevilla, North Africa welcomed massive waves of Moorish exiles from Portugal and Spain. By 1492, the midst of the religious fervor of Catholic kings, Spain and Portugal would expel all Muslims and Jews, even those who converted to Christianity, the Moriscos. In the 16th century, Morocco would become a battered ecological theater, taxed by political succession, struggles involving the dying Wattasid and the emerging Saadiyin dynasties. The same period also witnessed the encroachment of Portugal and Spain on Moroccan shores, struggling over the control of gold and slave markets along the Atlantic coast. And the Ottomans' influence over the trans-Saharan caravan trades routes linking Morocco with Black Africa. The conjuncture of events disturbed Morocco's trans-Saharan trade profits, and the old trading routes were slowly shifted toward Algeria and Tunisia by the Ottomans, while the Iberian powers monopolized maritime trade through the occupation of Moroccan ports. Morocco suffered the loss of the trans-Saharan trade, as well as increasing political instability, and was caught between warring centers of power. So there was political stability. And the point that I want to make here is that the Portuguese first came to Morocco, took advantage of a political vacuum of internal strife in Morocco, built major garrisons on the Mediterranean as well as on the Atlantic. Okay. And the story here is because it's linked to Estevanico. So in 1513, the Azmur, the town of Azmur here, would fall to the Portuguese. Okay, Azmur was a thriving town. It has about 6,000 people. It had a fishing industry. It had a thriving farming economy. It was a wealthy town, and the Portuguese want to get some of that wealth. Okay, so they colonized these parts, also linked to the African slave trade and gold and so on. So during these times of turmoil, Morocco, as I said, Morocco suffered from political instability, violence, and famine, particularly along the coast, okay? quote here, people were driven by the devastating famine which swept the Safi and Azmur area, where Estevanico is, to volunteer themselves as captives to the Christians who carried them en masse to Spain, end of quote. Some historians actually say that 60,000 Moroccans made their way to Spain and Portugal during the same period in various forms of servitude. In addition, the population of Azmur and other towns were allies of the Portuguese. So they asked King Don Manuel to migrate to Spain. So within this, and this is where my argument, this is what I'm trying to argue, is that within this turmoil, this idea of slave needs to be contested. Yeah, perhaps Estevanico actually was a political or an economic refugee that left by the Portuguese first to Spain. It had a thriving slave market. Then later on, he was bought by Dorantes, and they would come on the Narváez Expedition. So this is so that's the angle where I'm going there. So in addition, other factors also point to Esteban's shifting and unstable status in New Spain. And I'm going to come back again. I'm going back and forth here, right? I'm going to give you a headache, okay, because that's what this gives me, right? So for Fray Marcos de Niza, Estevanico remained an infidel, a Moor bent on the perpetuation of his religious heritage, mainly Islam or some form of it, whose adepts often played multiple roles, such as saint and doctor. Okay, so the stories that when I start reading about Esteban and his journey, I kept going back to this idea of what we talked about in class, Santino, worship of saints in Morocco. That idea that those rich rituals and how people can switch from one role to another and playing also the role of doctor. While under pressure, Esteban was a converso, otherwise he would not have been allowed to go to New Spain, because only if you were Catholic you would come, right? Yet he was clearly not a practicing Christian. His acts of resisting the friar in combination with Mendoza's severe orders to restrain him suggest that the Moor considered himself not a slave but a free agent. They also indicate that being a Moor did not equate with being a slave. The lives of members of the expedition were in his hands from Mexico City to Zuni land, right? They trusted him to walk many days ahead, not to flee, not to lead them astray, and not to poison or foul water sources. Most importantly, they trusted him not to turn the Indians against the Spanish. So Esteban's actions, Spanish regulations, and the reactions of all his companions suggest that he held the status of an employee or an indentured laborer. It is one thing to trust a servant or an employee to lead an expedition, but quite another to put the whole enterprise in the hands of a slave. It makes more sense to trust a slave in a contained sedentary environment, in some sort of domestic and bureaucratic organization, but not when he has a chance to flee or to rebel. Esteban knew too much about the land and its people that would make him a person of high rank and status. He had a profound knowledge of the Indians, their social and religious organisms. He was an adept guide and a medicine man. Above all, he knew how to adapt, survive in the desert. Given the opportunity to double-cross his caravan and to lead its friar off, he could have left to create a better life for himself among the Indians. These circumstances, in terms of his conflict with Friar Marcos, as well as the story of the Moor and the link with the Portuguese slave trade and so on, refocus the scholarly debate on Esteban's place and status, what he did and what he did not do. Nearly every theory in the literature about the arrival of Esteban in Arizona and New Mexico claims that his intentions centered on the idea of territorial claims and prestige for his actions. However, this is not plausible because any claims he made would have to be supported by the political and colonial framework of Don Antonio Mendoza, New Spain's viceroy. Territory was either claimed in the name of the Spanish crown or not at all. If this were a fantasy on the part of Esteban, this would at least suggest that he did not think of himself as a slave. Okay, so that's part two, okay, of our story. So you find yourself, so what? Why are you telling me this story, okay? So I'm telling you this story because I have a couple of claims that I like to, that I've been trying to make or to set them up about the journey of Esteban. And also, I have a theoretical angle in terms of that informs what I'm going to share with you. I have an angle of what's called post-colonial theory. Most of you are familiar with it, right? So how can I use theory to help me actually make sense of these inconsistencies or the assertions that the Spanish accounts, because after all, he was with the Spaniards from 1527 until 1539. And when you read the account, poor Estevanico, I think if you gather together all the mentions of him, you can actually make a little paragraph about his role in all this life transformative changing world. I mean, we're talking about somebody who's tricontinental in the sense that he's African, he's European, he was in Europe, in Spain, and he came with the Spanish to the Americas. It's mind-boggling that somebody of this stature tends to get this. Well, post-colonial theory can answer that one, right? Okay. All right. So the failure of the historical imagination and its dismissal of Esteban as a peripheral to the main thrust of its theoretical orientation to center stage Fray Marcos de Niza, Coronado, and Oñate is obvious in Spanish accounts. When the facts relating to the Moor are exhausted, there is no effort to re-examine his role because he's deemed marginal to its major historical interpretation of the past and the present. It is unlikely that more facts about Esteban will be discovered, since Esteban did not pen his own relation or account. This calls for a reorientation of the main theoretical issues to place Esteban at the center stage and to reinterpret the existing facts in light of this new perspective. Spanish accounts written from the point of view of Friar Marcos and Cabeza de Vaca or the Conquistador or other conquistadors miss the paramount role of the Moor, who throughout the conquest provided assistance and mapped the colonial road to America's pueblos and deserts. Because of this link, it is important to write the history of colonial America, or at least the Southwest or the greater Southwest, from the perspective of the colonized using social memory and previously unexamined documents. Commenting on the deconstruction of historiography in the recent attempts of the subaltern studies approach to the past of the Indian subcontinent, Edward Said, and they need to drink before I talk about Edward Said. So Edward Said, for instance, what he writes is that there, or subaltern historians, is no history of ideas, no calmly Olympian narrative of events, no disengaged objective recital of fact. It is rather sharply contestatory, an attempt to wrest control of the Indian, this is the Indian subcontinent, past from its scribes and curators in the present. Since we shall see much of the past continues into the present, and if there can be no actual taking of power, which is key there, in the writing of history, there can be at least a demystifying exposure of material interest, of what material interests are at stake, what ideology and method are employed, what parties advanced, which deferred, displaced, defeated. So the writing history is pretty almighty ideological, right? Okay? So the literature, the literature on the colonial history of the United States Southwest rarely alludes to gaps, silences, and misinterpretations, all of which underscore the fact that history writing is, after all, writing and not reality, and being agent provocateur for fun. Historiography was in the hands of the scribes and the soldiers who wrote the history of New Spain and its borderlands with one or two things in mind. Estevan's voice must be suppressed or forgotten so that the benefits and booty of exploration would be claimed. Because they silenced the marginalized persons or minimized their roles in the imperial conquest of the Americas, this attempt denied Esteban his experience and agency. Given the power and status relations of the subjects, the people who wrote within the imperial context, right? Given the power and status relations of the subjects of the narrative, we are invited to think that the subjects of the expedition are free from power relations that stand outside the authorial intentions of the colonial project of writing the other's history. Those marginal elements inside the structure of Spanish power are permitted little space for resistance, when in fact there is ample evidence to demonstrate that the problematic of writing narratives provides a multiplicity of bases for challenging the standard formula and wisdom of the colonial project, of projects which involves Christians, Native American Indians, and Moors in between, albeit Moors who become Ladinos, that is Spanish-speaking Catholics. A case in point is Esteban's free act and resistance toward Fray Marcos de Niza, or the breakdown of the superior-inferior status dichotomy when faced with multiple positions and aspirations and the ever-changing position of the Moor in New Spain. So between ideological and historiographical positions, the colonial discourse, as stated also by Homi Bhabha, is between, quote, what is always in place, already known, and something that must be anxiously repeated, as if the essential duplicity of the Asiatic or the bestial sexual license of the African that needs no proof can never really in discourse be proved. And as you can, some of the quotes I used here, there is an automatic link between the African and sexuality. It's been always there. That's another thing. So the colonial discourse, the colonial discourse insisted that the colonizer and the colonized were unchanging identities and fixed, and the repetition of this axiom constantly reconfigured the colonial subjects. This process of reconstituting and reforming the boundaries of the subject produced a binary opposition between the colonizer and the colonized, which secured the maintenance of the domination of the operating system of power relations in the form of master and subordinate. That's from Spivak, okay, quote. So the fragmented nature of the non-Spaniard subjects in the Spanish historical accounts written under the powerful encomienda mental framework conditioned the dramatic interpretations of the conquest of the southwestern United States. Because dreams of silver and gold were the driving concerns in the colonial enterprise and its history, we are left with narrative encounters in which the fortune seeker and the soul saver speak of others as marginal and underserving and undeserving of attention and voice. If we dismiss the fact that these sources come with ideological and power-enhanced stories to tell and repeat, we are likely to believe them uncritically and ignore the role of the non-Spaniard/European in the history of the Americas. In other words, it is either the sources of history that are at stake here, or the problematic nature of the sources and their authors. Rather, the piecing together of the story as documented and redocumented in the literature hardly leaves any space for the other. Esteban is reduced to a footnote in this story, and he is robbed from the space from which he can speak. The relaciones and other products or spins of dominate the colonial discourse, and because in these documents the other has no place except that of a subordinate, our historical knowledge and interpretations of what happened are very limited and impoverished. Here, the interpreter's admission of a gap in our knowledge does not mean we cannot be critical, but rather it opens opportunities to underline the silenced subaltern and to refocus the repetition of the colonial attempts to speak for the subordinate subject. Against the celebration of colonial imperial achievements, the alternative is to recognize the structured system of domination in Southwestern historiography. This conception, in my opinion, provides a rigorous method for understanding the sources of historical silencing and for formulating better critical positions against la cause célèbre of imperial conquests, well represented in the reproduction of historical writing in the Southwest. In the Southwest since the 16th century. Bye-bye reading, okay? Okay, so what? What can we do with all what I shared with you this afternoon? So again, as Dr. Jenkins said, that I'm an applied anthropologist. So what's the use of this? How do we leverage knowledge? Where do we go with it? If it's not for us, for our students and so on. So some things that have been in my brain for a long time now is maybe some potential student experiential learning opportunities. So in addition to the intellectualism product, like what I've bored you with, right? For grounding we're enough of backgrounding others. It's the foregrounding of the African experience in the history of the American Southwest, and I mean also Sonora and other places and so on. There is in town an Esteban Park, okay? How many of you have been there, please? Okay, so more of you need to go there, okay? Okay? So Esteban Park does not have a marker. The last time I checked. And this is important. I think this is an important fact also. This is, again, the thing I talked about, the issues of power in systems of knowledge production. Why doesn't he have a marker? Why does Coronado have multiple markers? I'm picking on my archaeologist friend I just met, and Rogelio here, right? So what's up with that? What's going on there? So our students can get involved in doing something, working on something like this. So this is the Estevanico Park. Now it's not far from I-10, as you can tell. I mean, Estevanico was the first person, and with the 4 survivors, actually, they're the precursor of I-10. You know, they traveled all the way. They traveled from Cuba all the way, all here, right? Another idea that I'm thinking that the University of Arizona and our institutions, as well as the city, as well as our students, it lends itself really to an applied project, is this notion of twin cities, relationships between Azamur and Tucson, okay? And to make those linkages and so on. And the other thing, and because of my interest, when I came back to Arizona, I said, what is my added value? Okay? After all these years, what is my added value? So something that I've been thinking, that I've thought about a long time, and my wife can actually, she's a witness too, she's here. So one thing I've been thinking a long time ago is, and I submitted last fall a course on Islamic Spain in the American Southwest. And this is the Black History Month, but we need more foregrounding, okay? I will keep you posted about the course. But again, the point is that these things lend themselves really to tangible things. I've always been impressed by my colleagues in archaeology, the CRM folks. They're always doing stuff, okay? And so on. So I think that's a beautiful model, you know, that we can also do other things, right, like this, right? And I would just want to say thank you so much for being here and for your attention. I appreciate it. And if you have any questions. And the picture here is from the internet. Okay, it's not. And what's interesting, I think, can I make it bigger? I don't know. Okay, so what's interesting. So you have, so this is a typical clothing or dress of a North African or Moor or the blue man, right? And so, but if in his forehead, actually there is a Berber symbol. Okay, it's Amazigh. Berbers like to call themselves Imazighan, okay? And they happen to be one of them, okay? So it's the letter Z or Zai in Tamazight. It's the 32, the 32nd letter in the Amazigh alphabet, okay? And it stands actually, so it's a symbol for Berber culture, for the language, but also the symbol itself stands for freedom and liberation from any chains. So it's about freedom or the free person. So I thought that was really fitting, okay? So that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hsain. We have a few minutes for some questions, and I can run around with the microphone here. So you want to just raise your hand, and I'll pass it along. Gary?
Thank you so much. Could you talk a second about Estevanico's probable languages in Amazon? It was Azamur. I assume that the port at the time that he lived there was multilingual in Azamur, and I don't know if Darija, the Arabic Amazite hybrid language was already in place, whether Portuguese and Nawa and other languages were spoken there, but he had such an incredible linguistic capability when he got to the New World. So I wondered if you have any speculations about that.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a wonderful question. So from what I've read, just what you said, Gary, is that, growing in Morocco as a composite society again, it's a multilingual society. That's why I said it's the most beautiful country. No, I'm kidding. So he must have spoken, he must have spoken Moroccan Arabic, the version we know of today, right? Or not the version that perhaps we know of today. He must also have spoken some variant of Tamazight, the indigenous peoples of North Africa, the Berbers, okay? They call themselves Imazigh. So given his status, at least those two, he must also have, if he had attended the Quranic school, he must have been also exposed to classical Arabic, again, as a tradition, as part and parcel of being a Muslim or the Muslim identity. Because the claim I also make here, or because it is the St. Stephen forced conversion, right? He was a Muslim when he left Morocco. I would imagine also that he must have spoken some Portuguese because of the Portuguese presence in Azmur, okay? And later on being, sold in Seville's slave market and so on. I'm sure he must have picked up Spanish and with the Narváez expedition and accompanying the other 3 survivors for 8 years. I'm sure he became fluent in Spanish, and also picked up from the readings, which don't know, but just from the accounts again, is that he picked up a lot of Native American languages along the I-10, okay? And they were moving from one group to another group. Some Native Americans, just like the Berbers, like me, I don't understand those Berbers from the north. But we can make it, okay? So I think he was really good at the in-betweenness. He did thrive at these intersectionalities, okay? And that's why it just baffles me, Gary, that all we get is a paragraph or 2. Thank you very much.
Other questions? All right. I'm going to go there first to go back around. There you go.
Thank you, Hsain, very much for this very exciting talk. I just really enjoyed the telling that in itself subverted sort of the dominant narratives you were talking about. So I have 2 questions. You don't have to answer both. But the first one is, how did the Moor or Moorishness come to be associated with blackness? If Morocco is North African, is it by way of these trade caravans that you were talking about, which also kind of encompassed the slave trade and all that? And the other question is, did you come across any information about how Esteban was initiated as a medicine man amongst the Zuni?
Okay. So the first question about the term Moor or Moorishness, right, and associated with black people, right? That's where oops. So the question is about the nature of, or the term, or again the etymology of the word Moor, right, and how it became associated with black people. And again, as a North African myself, I've always understood that Moorish is associated with Muslims, the Muslim other, right, in the European imagination, right, and particularly after the Inquisition. But in the particularly the Euro thing, I think it became associated. Some of you in the literature, please correct me, okay? But Othello or Shakespeare's person, right? I mean, that was like the outlet, that actually associated the term the Moor, with the dark or the black person, right? So there is that, I think, in the Western imagination, right? In addition to that, just label Muslim, okay, from the Christian side. And it's interesting also, maybe the idea of Moor is not, it's also, it has a, can you hear me? Oh, okay, sorry. I am a nomad, so I like to move, yeah. So the idea of Moor, or the roots of Moor, Dr. Rabia here is a linguist, so please correct me. So the idea of the Moor actually comes from, we can trace it back to the Roman times, okay? And so it actually designates the Roman provinces in northern Morocco, north of the Atlas Mountains to the Mediterranean, and also western and central Algeria. So that's where that thing comes from. But then it has evolved, right, into what we know also today as beautiful Moorish architecture, Moorish design, and other things. And when we talk about those things, we're thinking about Moorish Spain, right? And those ideas are there. Is that where we're going with this? Yeah, okay. So so associating the blackness, I guess, and the or somebody Moor is used automatically. I think Shakespeare did us, he started the whole thing, okay? You guys can deal with it, right? And okay, so the other one about
How he was initiated as a man.
yes. Okay, so what I read from the sources that I read, if usually the other three, the white, Spanish, Europeans actually were acting, but slowly but surely also he became to emulate them more, to take the healer role. But I don't believe that either, okay? As I said, in Morocco, there is this interesting spectrum, right? Between healer and doctor or whatever, or doing saintly things, right? So I think he must have, it's something that he must have seen in Morocco as well, in terms of being a healer. But Debaka and the other two, I don't have any evidence per se to say if there was anything, but from what I understand is that he was following their model, and as I said, they stood behind. And also the Cabeza de Baca and the others, particularly Cabeza de Baca from my readings, when he wrote his sanitized account of the journey from Florida all the way to Mexico, they were very worried about what the Catholic Church will say about their healing powers, because that was not their realm. That was the realm of the clergy, so to speak. So when it was talked about in timidly, okay? But I don't know exactly if he was.
We have one
Sorry.
more too. Sorry, you can probably pop that microphone off, and can you? Yeah, that might help a little bit. Sorry to interrupt you there.
I'm really curious about the point where he went, he returned and then he chose to go back again to, on his route where he had been previously enslaved, like as a real slave. What would his other option have been if he hadn't decided to re-up and go back again?
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah, that is a really nice novel to write, right? Yeah, that would be really awesome if he just said, I ain't doing this, I'm tired, I've been there on the road for 8 years, I'm not going to do it. And so some recent accounts that I've read is that actually Mendoza, Viceroy Mendoza, asked Dorantes, because he was the owner of Estevanico, He said, he wanted to buy Estevanico from Dorantes. And Dorantes said no, okay? But somehow Mendoza convinced Dorantes that this is in the service of the king, and so on. So some people who say that he was sold to Mendoza so that he can come with Friar Marcos. Others say that he was on loan. So what do I read? How do I read that personally? I have no evidence for this. These are just my, just crazy ideas. Is that I think once he got back into, remember that he's a Moor, and he's perceived as the enemy in a sense. Is part of that thing that the Inquisition got rid of, right? So it's baked in, or from the get-go, this is not somebody, So I think I like to think that he was suffocated in Mexico City, in those circles, because the others, as I said earlier on, some of them went back. Cabeza de Vaca went back to Spain to get another gig, in South America. The land grant thing, this is the startup culture of that time. If you want to get rich, that's what you do, right? So I think Estevanico said, I think he might weigh his options. He's like, I'm going to be on the road here. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to be the master. I'm going to be the master of my destiny here. I know where I'm going. I know the people where I'm going. In a sense, the road on the desert became this liberating space for him. That is speculation on my behalf. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for the question.
Got one more back here.
Hi, Professor. Thanks for the talk and presentation. My question will be about 10 years ago, an article appeared in Past and Present on a guy named Elias. The article was The Secret Life of Elias of Babylon. It was about an Ottoman subject who belonged to the Eastern Church, who was an Asturian, and he left his town during the late 17th century, about 100 years after your guy. He left Baghdad and he went to Rome first, and he joined these, the discoverers or like the sailors, and he went to Lima, the South America and stuff, and to collect palm and for missionary activities and other things. But Gabriel, in his article, he was presenting him as a very exceptional character. Like, it's kind of like unimaginable to think that an Ottoman subject going to the this new world. So apparently there is this guy 100 years before his departure from Baghdad. My question is kind of like two questions actually branching. The first one will be like, what were the conditions, like how they could leave the old world and join the sailors and go to the Southern America or like the New World? What they required, what they had to have. This is the first one, and the other one is what was the volume of these travelers who wanted to be the master of their destinies actually during that time?
Yeah, good question. I read a little bit about the Ottoman person, right? That in Peru he was there actually as a crypto-Muslim or something like for 16 or 17 years, right? Then he went back to Turkey. Is that right, Muhammad? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So what was needed? So this is a really good question, and I think, so in order to, as you know, for Estevanico, he was the quote unquote the slave of Dorantes. So he came as a member of that expedition. So the expedition that he came on was organized by Narváez. Okay, so he got a land grant from the king to go and explore Florida, okay? So Narváez had to basically, like a startup, I'm not kidding. Okay, the king does not give you anything. You have to go get your ships. You gotta get your food. You gotta get your supply. The supply is on you. All that the king gives you is the permission to claim or to lay claim to that territory in the name of the King of Spain. So it was a personal endeavor. And Narvaez, for instance, he was actually in competition with Cortez, okay? And he lost an eye, trying to fight Cortez. That did not really go well for Narvaez, right? And also it didn't go well in Florida, and so it's personal investment. So you have to get other investors to invest to do all this. The government, from what I read, recent book that I just read about Cabeza de Vaca, that's what it was. Because Spain, if you want to get rich very quickly, you go out, you go explore. The same thing with Portugal. But the king still has, you gotta pay the king. There is a tribute that you have to pay the king for the land grant that you're gonna offer. And it's about conquering, it's about pacifying, it's about spreading Christianity and what have you. So if you are asking me about how Estevanico did that, I think he joined as quote unquote again as a slave of Dorantes, because Dorantes was a capable maritime person, right? And Cabeza de Vaca actually was the treasurer of the Narváez Expedition, and so. The other thing that's just somewhat linked, which interesting and speaks to these days, and since you mentioned the Ottomans, Muhammad, is that Mendoza, when he sent Friar Marcos and Estevanico on their journey up here, so he was competing with Cortez, because Cortez also was trying to get in here before him. And that's why I didn't put that much money in it. But other accounts also tell us that I think the recent work by Flint on the Coronado's expedition, he talks about actually how Mendoza had a long-term goal besides just the northern territories of New Spain. The Mendoza was interested in outdoing the Ottoman Empire. Okay, that was the goal, because the Silk Road, who controlled the Silk Road? The Ottomans, right? During that time. So Mendoza actually was looking for a way, guess to where? Just like China and India. That was what he was trying to do, because the Ottomans were just too, you couldn't fly over them back then. Okay, you had to go on land and so on, so that's another thing, since you just mentioned the Ottomans, and I also want to recognize my friend, my colleague here at the U of A, Dr. Barbara Mills, for alerting me to the long-term goal versus the short-term goal of Mendoza.
Hsain, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. Thank you.